All right, now that we've looked at some basic theories, um, let me review real quickly because I think it's somewhat important to be able to do that. And the the thing to keep in mind when we're talking about the theories of emotion, and I'll just review this before we get into the embodiment of our emotion, is that essentially all of those three theories ultimately fit together. And so essentially what you have is the event itself that occurs, and it's the emotional event or an event that is emotionalized, if you will. And we can take it into our appraisal mechanism and make a call about how that actually operates or what impact or relevance it has to us. And then that essentially leads to our emotional response. And this diagram is in your book, but I wanted to highlight it for you. So the appraisal up here captures Lazarus, which is one guy that I didn't go into huge detail with, and then the Schachter and Singer approach. The event can also just directly trigger the emotional response, and that's where Zientz and Ledoux and their theory that comes into play with the high road, low road explains how we react to emotional events. And so all three of these account for different aspects. When we have an event that we can actually appraise, then that leads to a particular emotional response. We actually occur, it's not sequential at all. The thing I want you to be mindful of is that the event occurs, and in a lot of ways, we do both of these things at the same time. The appraisal can have a huge impact on what I actually do as far as my reaction to it. So each one of those have a specific understanding. Appraisal is important. It's the cognitive aspects that impact it, even from a scriptural point of view when it talks about don't be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. The importance of how we frame things is quite important. Can't be really understated. Now, the other aspect to keep in mind when we're talking about emotions is not only the mind aspects of it, but there's also the body aspects of emotion. And your book refers to it as embodied emotion. And these two graphs show you a little bit of how we respond to, in terms of performance, and how it relates to our arousal level. And what you will find is that performance level jumps up the more difficult the task to meet it according to the need. The easier the task is, the slower the arousal is to meet the demand of the particular task. So our arousal level tends to rise extremely quickly when we meet a task that is very difficult. If we can appraise it and figure out what to do, and according to it, we will judge that task as hard and then shoot our reaction up to it very, very high. The other aspect of understanding is really understanding the different nervous system reactions when we're talking about to our response to stress itself, or emotion for that matter. So we've got the ANS nervous system, if you remember, and there are subcomponents to this. That is the parasympathetic, which brings things down, and the sympathetic, which ramps things up according to the particular need that exists. And so essentially this is controlling arousal in a general sense, and then we have two complementary systems that manage this arousal, whether to ramp it up or to slow it down. So the ANS mobilizes your body for action, directing the adrenal glands to release stress hormones, epinephrine, otherwise known as adrenaline, or norepinephrine, which brings things back down into the range that they need to be in. So essentially, when a threat occurs, your body will react, and this can be physical or psychological. And what happens is then your body reacts accordingly. The sympathetic nervous system kicks into gear. Your eyes will dilate. Your salivation will decrease. You'll start to sweat. Your heart rate will increase. Your digestion will be inhibited, and the adrenal glands will pump out the adrenaline that it needs to meet the demand. Once the demand or once the threat is removed, what then happens is then the parasympathetic nervous system kicks into gear, and it brings everything back down to homeostasis. Now, I hate it when I talk and write at the same time. My spelling goes downhill. So the parasympathetic ramps reactions, ramps down reactions. So if you've ever been in an athletic event and you are ramped up because of adrenaline and all the needs that are needed for an athletic event, and then the event is over and you go to the shower and take a shower and come back out and you find yourself still very ramped up, essentially it's taking some time for your parasympathetic nervous system to begin to empty your system of all the hormones that come with a sympathetic response, the sympathetic nervous system response. And that essentially is one of the key components when we're talking about the embodiment of emotion as to how it actually occurs. What's interesting about this is that if you were to diagram this a little differently and say performance would still be on this end and arousal on this end, what you will find is that as an event or whatever occurs, you will have a climbing and then ultimately a trailing off. What a lot of athletes will point to, and even when you're in some other event, that you're the most alert, most conscious, things you remember the most, etc., is really right here. And this is referred to actually as an optimal level of stress, which we'll talk about a little later. And so it balances performance with arousal, and that's what these things are like over here. So what oftentimes athletes will refer to this as is when they're in that perfect zone, if you will, of performance, where arousal and performance meet. And that really is in the backdrop of most everything we're going to talk about in this particular series of modules is the embodiment of emotions and how we actually show it expressively, how we experience it cognitively, and then how we display it going back out again or showing other people how we're feeling.